Well, Eric, kicking things off here, quite an active and stormy end to the month of May. So, kind of what's a recap there, and to kind of prelude what we're going to be expecting here for the at least the short term here moving forward. Last week we talked about a potential shift in the pattern that was going to maybe put some drier conditions here for a lot of areas that are really asking for it. So, what's the latest with what we've seen and kind of where we're going?
Yeah, I actually think for once the pattern shift prediction might come true, which is good because it's been quite frustrating to see it not. But what we're shifting away from is seen right here on this animation. I mean, this was on Sunday. Just look at the extent, of the storms that rolled through the central part of the United States. They put down some heavy rain through 9 o'clock this morning, just this past weekend's worth of rainfall, again, just hitting those same areas. And take note, Dawson, we did get some good moisture into parts of Kansas. I mean, these were some dry acres in through here that saw some rain. It wasn't widespread. Not everybody got a drink out of this, but there was some decent moisture in this area. But if you look back over the last 7 days, it's been fascinating to watch the storms roll through here and produce outflow that's actually gone backwards and kicked off more storms in the southern plains. But with that, I've seen some absolutely gargantuan hail, some measuring 5 to 6 inches. I mean, that's this big hail, that big falling out of the sky. We've, of course, been observing it with radar. And so if you just look back over the weekend at everywhere that we observed hail coming out of storms, just take a look at the plains getting down here toward the south. I mean, that's a lot of hail from these weekend storm events. I did get a picture here from Colorado. I want to remind everybody that big hail is not always the worst thing. Little hail can cause a lot of problems as well. And this is a bunch of, gosh, a penny-sized hail just piling up here. And it also came with some extremely wet conditions. Let me get rid of that audio so you can hear this or see this, excuse me. But just take a look at all of the cattle running through this, just the tremendous amount of water that fell from some of these storms. If we get to these recent storms, I mean, the storm reports just continue to funnel in, and we did finally get an update on that event that was on the 26th. I just want to share this with you and everybody that's watching. The record holder for the most severe weather reports in a single day was April 4th, 2011, and that was over 1,400 reports. We are right now 6 away from 1,400 on the 26th of this May. So this just shows you what you asked. It's been incredibly active. I think all of it can be summed up in this map, though. Since mid-April, when we got into this pattern, till now, this is what we've seen. And while our eyes are drawn to the extremely wet conditions in parts of the western and central Corn Belt, also parts of the Mid-South, getting down here, Texas toward the Delta, it's actually this that I'm thinking about in Florida. It's the drought that's been in southern Texas with the heat that's moved into New Mexico. That is where the drought that's in Mexico is having its biggest influence. It's all throughout the Gulf and coming up into this part of the Southwest. And that's what I'm concerned about going forward, because the pattern we got into was largely driven by cooler weather west and heat east. And this was all set up in the North Pacific with these two big ridges here sitting on the northern edge of all that warm water. That warm water is still there, but for the next maybe 7 to 10 days, the jet stream has pushed into it, which is odd. It's hard to do. And therefore, it's now blocked up over the western United States. So you said, can we get some drier weather in for some folks? Yes, but we got to be patient for a couple more days, because when this block sets up, heat goes into the west and we end up getting some much drier flow in the Midwest. So take a look. We've already seen the excessive heat watches and warnings going up in this area. And today we still have the severe storm risk in the, Iowa, Wisconsin area and down here in the south. Tomorrow, though, look, it's in that same area that's been hit multiple times, but watch this. This is how things look on the 5th. No slight, no marginal, no, we're backing this pattern off a bit. And while we see that the next 7 days looks wet, most of this is coming in the current system that's rolling through. All right, so a lot of that's coming in that system. It'll leave a front down here that'll bring in some rain later, but that's the artificial intelligence forecast. That's the NBM. This is the WPC. This is the European model, and that's a GFS. So you saw all 5 models kind of have a similar pace to this, but a lot of this moisture is coming in the next 48 hours. So what happens is we follow that up with drier conditions moving in here. Over the next 10 days, this whole area sees a pretty high chance of staying under a half inch. And now you start to see this area staying with a decent chance of under a half inch. And that pattern's all being kind of promoted by ridging here. And if you get northwest flow and it is June, early June, that's dry. If I showed you this same map and it was July, I'd be talking about storms coming off this pattern, but we're not quite there yet. So here it is, Dawson. This is what I wanted to get to. This is the week 2 forecast. So what happens is the flow comes over this ridge and down. It then curls its way around a low that'll live over here, which leaves a frontal boundary there. So our flow comes out of the north and west for the Corn Belt and gives us finally some drier days to string together, which is great. We need some drier weather. Persistent wet weather means we can't finish replanting. We can't get back in and do some of that extra nitrogen application that we need to do. And we can't finally just get some heat and some sunshine on the crop to get it to go. So what is the temperature going to look like? Well, let's skip this and get here. My frost map, mostly empty except for the mountains. Fantastic. If we look at the high temperatures, watch. Here's today's highs, tomorrow's, Wednesday. Look at the triple digit heat here. We're cool, but only by a degree or two. That's fine. This isn't anything to worry about. The heat in the west is prompting that. Maybe by Thursday, the high struggled to get out of the 70s here or upper 60s, but okay, upper Midwest typically gets that. I mean, that's not that far out of normal. But into the weekend, I mean, these temperatures are fantastic. We'll pick up some decent heat over the next 7 days. Some places easily grabbing another 120 to 150 GDDs in the primary corn and soybean belt. The only place that's lacking is a bit farther to the north. So day 5 through 10, the heat stays on, but we don't expect it to last. I think once we get out there middle of the month, the flow kind of comes back to something a bit more like this versus keeping us with all the big ridging back in the west, which is going to be good. And we'll just have to see how that all plays out once we work our way toward the middle of June. I think once we get past middle of June, we see better chances of storms coming back. So that's good. I don't want to see dryness just lasting for months and months. Okay, bring it in, give us a shot, and then give us a better chance for rain after that.
So let's talk about that then with the long range is that so NOAA updated their CPC outlook for the month of June, putting in a little bit of a stormy corridor or at least above normal precipitation for the plains region that just got wet. Was that the storms that just went through now and we might get a little bit of a shut off? And then moving on beyond that, kind of how is that long range outlook looking? Because we're looking at potentially higher and warmer temperatures for that summer outlook, but precipitation is still going to be that question mark.
Yeah, I bet the only thing I can say that could be, even if we do get hotter and drier, that could be good is we do have a full profile of moisture finally for most of the Corn Belt. So yeah, you asked about this new CPC update. Certainly a lot of this is coming very soon, right? So we have the rain that's moving through here. The front lingers and sits there driving this, but there's some drier conditions starting to come into this pattern and a lot of heat that's going in west. And if you mentioned the longer range, they're going to update this in about two and a half more weeks. So this is still a ways away from being updated. But overall, it's going to be that heat coming out of Mexico, the drought spreading in that area that I think is most consistent in the models. And I remember 2020 is one of my analog years, and all of that drought and heat was down here. And we did have storms that came over the top of it, including, of course, the big derecho that hit in August. Now, not calling for that on a repeat, but I just want to let you know we could get into that kind of stormy pattern. But do you see all of this? This is something to think about because if we look right now at the ocean temperatures, this is a 90-day animation. It's very warm in here. And this is where hurricanes are going to develop. And it's a reminder that we started hurricane season. It begins on June 1. It's usually a slow ramp up to middle of September, but we're already remembering that historically, if we're going to watch for any sort of tropical cyclone to develop, it's in the Gulf of Mexico where ocean temperatures are quite warm right now. So we have to weigh that against kind of this bigger picture of what the ocean temperatures are doing. So I'll just tell you this, Dawson, to kind of wrap up that longer term view. I want to know what this is doing. This is what's set up the stormy pattern, the cooler water here while La Nina builds with a very warm Atlantic, okay? So here's my ifs. If this stays put, by the time we get into summer, this isn't good. We loved it well, let me rephrase that. In spring, it brought rain, okay, undid drought. But if that stays there and doesn't fill this area in with more warmth, and it just stays hot here, you'll get a ridge there, and a ridge here, and a ridge here. But if it starts to fill this in, we have a better chance of that ridge sliding toward it, meaning we get northwest flow and thunderstorms going into summer, followed by an active hurricane season, meaning La Nina is not even really going to be a major part of this pattern right now. So that's what I'm thinking, Dawson, for the longer term.
That'll, of course, be interesting to watch. But blowing out to a more international view, a little bit of an update on South America is that still looking at some drier signals for the southern Brazil and Argentina areas, and also Australia getting a little bit of projected moisture that markets are kind of having an eye on right here.
Yeah, so if we start in South America, remember, we talked for weeks about the flooding in southern Brazil. That's gone. The full dry season is going now, and we'll know probably in the next 3 weeks about the size of that safrinha crop. We typically learn a lot about it around the solstice and whatnot. It is quite warm down here. There has been some better moisture hitting some of the driest parts of Australia. That little spot I circled there, that's a big growing area. It may not look like much, but it's right down here. There's some moisture coming in toward Adelaide, which we need, and some of the New South Wales, which is needed as well. But I'll be honest, that's all in the southern hemisphere. I'm watching this. Get to the eastern side of Ukraine into this part of Russia's main grain belt. And models keep calling for rain to come into here, but they keep failing. And the heat in that area, we're expecting over the next 10 days for temperatures to be up to 20 degrees on average warmer than normal. So, Dawson, even if it does storm, you follow that with heat the next day, you're going to evaporate that water. I mean, it's just not going to be there. So the the story that's developing in the Russian kind of grain belt here is one I think we need to be paying close attention to. I'm not saying it's a 2010 repeat, but I've been getting asked a lot. In fact, I've got a guy in France right now that every morning asks me about the weather there. I'm like, hey, man, you're closer. You tell me what's going on. But he's very concerned that there's going to be an issue with Russia having to pull back on its grain exports. And if that happens, that triggers a lot of things in the markets. So, yeah, I think June is a pivotal month for both the northern and southern hemisphere.
Yeah, that Russian story is going to be really interesting because with this whole wheat market, global Russian wheat prices were the big story on what drove the grain markets up and kind of being a little bit supportive here recently. So that is going to be an interesting story to watch. Of course, we'll be watching the June outlook, looking at those longer range forecasts and looking for a pattern change for the US. But again, for this week, thank you, Eric. Always appreciate your insights.
Yeah, no problem. Have a good one, Dawson.